Welcome to Swing Left, Nebraska. We are the regional chapter of Swing Left, 100% run by grassroots volunteers dedicated to fighting for a more equitable, inclusive, and prosperous Nebraska and motivating Democratic leaning voters to vote. When we don't vote, when we don't get engaged, get involved, or stand up for what we believe in, we're effectively giving up our power. Action is the antidote. When we collaborate, work together, support each other, and our shared values, we can make our voices heard, make an impact, and inspire others to join the fight. Swing Left Nebraska offers you the information, actionable ideas, and tools you need to advocate for progressive legislation and to help elect Democratic candidates who will fight for the common good for all Nebraskans. Let's mobilize, let's take action, let's go. Greetings and warm welcome to the season finale of the Swing Left Nebraska podcast. We sincerely appreciate you taking the time to listen in. Our focus for the past few months has been discussing the unicameral and inspiring you to become more informed about the political process. In this concluding episode of the season, we'll take a moment to reflect on the strides we've made, the obstacles we've encountered, and the valuable insights we have gained. Additionally, we will examine what the future holds and explore the prospects for the progressive movement in Nebraska. We have a lot to dive into, so let's do a show. Hi, Sydney. Welcome back to the Swing Left Nebraska podcast. I really appreciate your time today. So let's start off with the vetoes. Tell me about that.
Sure. And thanks again so much for talking with me today. This last week was a whirlwind and they ended the session early. They actually had 2 more days that they could have conducted business. But the day when they handled all the veto overrides, it was so disappointing. I'm just really unhappy with how the legislature allowed the governor to veto 19, I think it was, line item, and they only overrode one of those. So they really ceded a lot of their authority to the governor. In fact, they talked on the floor of the legislature about how they were supporting the governor and didn't want to oppose the governor. And this is an equal branch of government. We're electing them to represent us directly. And it was disappointing to see, especially some of the various items that the governor vetoed. There's really surprising some of the things that he vetoed and that the legislators still couldn't find the will to assert their authority. I would say that out of the 19 line items that the governor vetoed, the most surprising to me was the provider rates. And that particular disagreement between the governor and the legislature with provider rates was to do with the second year. I think they were all on board with 3% on the first year. And then the governor didn't want any provider rate increases for the second year. And it has been something very difficult for rural healthcare with our like nursing homes and hospitals. And there's just such a disparity between cost of living and cost of doing business and what our state is providing as far as these rates. And it's just been something I think in the news, and we all are aware of how hard it is to find employees in general in our state. Like we have 80,000 openings in Nebraska right now. And if you think about real special expertise in healthcare and how much more difficult it is to find people, especially when you're not paying competitive rates. So it's disappointing and really concerning, especially for our rural healthcare in our state. And the senators did not override him. And they said, we'll come back and we'll work on it in the next session, the second year of the biennium. But it's really difficult. Most people understand, even on a personal level, when you do your budget or when you have a business, you have to make your plans. You have to have strategy and budget further out than just, 9 months at a time. So it's something that was really frustrating. I think that they should have overridden all of them, but there were a few that were really surprising, including the legislature expenses and salaries for like clerks and staff. They agreed to give salary increases, which are necessary for competitive pay. And these people are doing important work. on our behalf for all Nebraskans, right? We want them to do a good job. We want them to find the best people. And so they should be paying competitively. And they are going to give them the raises, but take it from a different bucket of money instead of doing it from the general fund and having the rates, these salary ranges formalized so that it is going forward something that they would just be building on. So it's surprising. They had quite a few line item vetoes on things that were important for children, especially vulnerable children. I'm really surprised by this. And I guess we'll have to see what they do next year. Maybe they'll come back and hopefully correct the governor's view on some of these things and re legislate this.
I would hope so. Wasn't there a veto on a bill that would provide support to an organization that helps pregnant teenagers?
Yes, yes. And okay, I have a lot of thought about this one, and we could go in depth on any number of these issues, but this particular disagreement between the governor and the legislature and the authority about where the money comes from, it's really troubling because it sounds like what they're trying to do with this, and everyone agrees that we should be helping these young mothers, these pregnant teenagers. As a state, as a community, we want to support struggling families. If they need help, we want to make sure they get off to a good start and have what they need so that they can take care of these children. And the money that the governor is saying this should come from is TAMP, which is temporary aid for needy families. And that's a whole other issue in our state that we have not been providing direct cash payment assistance to enough Nebraskans that actually qualify and are eligible. We've been building up this really large surplus in that bucket of money, and it is something from the federal government. We all pay taxes, right? So those tax dollars that we send to the federal government that come back to Nebraska, we should be utilizing correctly and maximizing them. And the governor is saying that instead of those direct types of assistance for these needy families, that it would go to this project. I don't know if it jeopardizes the federal money. We shouldn't be doing it that way. The money is earmarked for other things. It should be. So that's really a big question. And I just feel like when we're having senators pontificate and actually take substantial, important votes regarding things that they keep saying pro life, and in fact, to force Nebraskans to carry pregnancies against their will, that we would at all jeopardize any support for these teenagers is just really, it's perverse.
It is. It's disgusting. When I saw that, I was in just complete shock. Like my jaw is still to the ground at this point. So,
I read an article in the paper, and it sounds like this organization will hopefully be able to find their funding. I think they're going to move forward with the project. And I just really would like Nebraskans to understand that we have an ongoing problem with TANF, which is that temporary aid to needy families. That is an ongoing problem in many states across the country, including Nebraska. And we have not been handling it correctly in our state. We've left too much authority to the executive branch, and it's been opaque. There's not been enough transparency about what they are or aren't doing with that money. And that the governor was wanting to use that money for something that the legislature was going to budget out of their regular funds is just really tricky. And that the senators wouldn't override on that. It's disappointing to me.
yeah, no, needless to say, yeah, extremely disappointing. So let's move on to the voter ID that passed literally the last minutes of the session. The bill itself has been described as the best of the worst scenario when it comes to utilizing voter ID. There were some changes that were made. It's definitely a sad day for Nebraskans that they will now have to use voter ID, but there were some good changes that make it, like I said, the best of the worst scenario. Can you expand on that?
It's really interesting to watch how this all happened because Senator Slama was instrumental in leading in the charge with this whole voter ID process and really involved with the whole petition drive and on the ballot. And it seemed like the details of it should have been really worked out and arranged much earlier. I'm surprised that that part wasn't done sooner. And so when they came to the committee hearing on this bill, I guess were still like things going back and forth in the background, maybe between the senators and Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee and the Secretary of State and the various election commissioners in every county. All of these stakeholders, I think, hopefully want to do the right thing. And at the last minute in the committee hearing, Senator Slama replaced her bill with a whole different bill, like with many changes. That happens sometimes. That's not anything against the rules or that never happens, but it was out of the blue for many people on the committee. And as the committee was trying to determine, okay, how do we move forward with this very important duty? The voters of Nebraska said, we want a voter ID in our state. And so even the senators that disagree with the need for that, because we do not have fraud in Nebraska, they realize we need to implement it. And so it needs to be done in a way where we do not disenfranchise people more than maybe already would happen. And Senator Slama's bill was just not in line with what the actual wording on the ballot initiative was. She was trying to make it more expansive regarding citizenship and things like that. And it would have really been a hardship as far as voting by mail. And the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee works with all these stakeholders to try to understand these very important details so that when the rubber meets the road and you're actually having people vote, that you're not having unintended consequences with this bill. And so they actually were two totally different paths, it seemed. And it really, I think, was contentious in the background. Maybe we all didn't see that. It spilled over onto the floor of the legislature with the last two rounds of debate, though, on this. Senator Slama filibustered her own bill and really disagreed with the committee version. And she kept calling it the Asn bill, the Asnan amendment, that it was the Secretary of State that was so involved with it. But it was the very last day of the session and she was filibustering. And there were senators that wanted to wrap up and go home. Senator Erdman really just didn't sugarcoat it the other day and was giving her what for and said, what are we doing? This is something that should have been wrapped up sooner. All of this back and forth, there were options. I don't know exactly what all he said, but what his point was is that the senators that live certain distance away, once you get a certain length of session into the afternoon, it's difficult for people to even try to get home. Like they're going to be stuck in town one more day in Lincoln. And they were angry. He was angry anyway about it. And I think he was rude to Senator Slama and she wasn't having it. She said, I will take my time and you won't scold me. And she really just wanted Nebraskans to understand more about what had gone on in the background on this. I think maybe a couple people joined her with the vote, but it was overwhelming that the legislature passed the bill with the amendment in it from the committee. So that's what went to the governor's desk and he signed it. So it is now going to go into effect.
So do you have a clear understanding of exactly like what this means? When will this be implemented? Will these changes go into the effect for the upcoming elections?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And part of what I was really pleased with this legislation is it included they made sure that there will be education about it. So the Secretary of State and the election commissioners, and then I know outside organizations as well, are going to be doing a lot of education for voters so that we can all understand these details. I feel really confident about that. And I know more information will be coming out so that we can all understand. But if anyone right now is listening and doesn't have an ID that would have a picture on it that they could use for voting, go get it. Just do it now. Otherwise, there will be IDs provided by the state. And I'm so glad that there won't be a fee for that. So I just think that more information will be coming and I wouldn't be the expert. I'll defer to the Secretary of State and the other organizations that'll provide that.
Yeah, and I think this is a good place to put in a plug that Now is a really good time to just take a minute and check your voter registration, and I will link that in the show notes. I did some voter engagement outreach this last week with the Sarpy County Democrats, and I met someone who was registered, but his name was spelled incorrectly. And I said, "You need to fix that now."
Oh, yes,
And
yes,
because they will look at the spelling of your name as how you're registered and compare it to your voter ID. And if it doesn't match, there's your vote. So now is a really good time to just take a minute. I'll link it for you in the show notes to check your voter registration now. And another friendly reminder, just because someone did ask me this question, you may not know that if you are moving or you're planning to move within the state, you do have to re-register, and you should be able to do that at the DMV, but you can also do that online as well.
absolutely. And I think it is a good idea for everybody to just double check because sometimes people may not have voted recently. And I know some people who were surprised by the ballot they received because they didn't remember that they had changed their actual party affiliation. Some people change party affiliation for primaries. They want to vote in a certain primary and then leave it that way and maybe didn't intend to. So, yeah, there's lots of good reasons that everybody should be checking.
And check the expiration date on your license as well. I just happened to look at mine. It's so small, and I didn't realize that mine's actually coming up this year. But that actually is a good question. I can't remember what ended up with that, if they are even accepting IDs that are expired.
I believe there's leeway but it's best, I believe, for everybody to just make sure and get it handled and be up to date and not worry about trying to qualify if there's some sort of provision or something that you need to take advantage of.
Yep. So there's some homework for you. That's the theme of this
Yeah.
episode is active rest. We're going to be resting even though the session is over. There's plenty of things that you can be doing. So check your registration, look at the expiration on your ID. So let's move on to the judiciary package. I know it was filled with tons and
Yeah.
tons of bills, LB50. So let's discuss that. Tell me, what are your thoughts on that package? What stands
Well,
out to you?
I'm glad it passed. But it's something on the last day, it was surprising. There were senators standing up and saying that they wanted to recommit it back to committee, which at that late stage, especially after the speaker announced it would be the last day, it was surprising to me. But I feel like there's a lot in that bill. I don't even know all of it because there were so many of these big kind of omnibus packages. So I know that Senator Wayne really had some good reform. And he said he doesn't like the word reform. So I need to be careful about how we word this. The people that worked on this, I think, had some really good, important improvements, I guess is the word we'll use, to such things as one thing that happened this last week were some guards, some security. I guess I'm not sure the right word in prison. The people who work in the prisons, as far as security and guards, they were hurt. There were people that were stabbed this last week. And it included in this bill even such things as these really sturdy vests. And I apologize, I don't know the right word for it, but there were things to deal with release and how that is handled so that we can help people be successful. People who are incarcerated when they're coming back into our community, we want them to be successful. That's good for everybody. Yeah, there's some really good things in there. And I want to dig into some of these bills over the summer. I'm going to be looking more in depth, but I'm really glad that this package was able to get through.
Awesome. And I look forward to digging into these bills with you in depth as well and sharing with our audience so they have a clear understanding of everything that went down, because it is really hard to unpack everything in one episode considering how much happened in the last minutes of this session.
And a lot of these bills did not receive very much floor debate because they had so many pieces of legislation wrapped up into them. So that's something that I'm actually concerned about. That's something that is not how we normally do business in Nebraska in our legislature. And I hope we get away from that in the future.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So let's pivot over to the Support Our Schools campaign. That's a big deal. And there's lots of updates that you have to share with us.
Yes, I feel so strongly about this. And I think most Nebraskans agree that we don't want our public dollars to go to private schools, especially to schools that we have the legislators allowing discrimination. It's just really doesn't make sense. And as far as the tax side of it, I know everyone loves a good tax credit. Who doesn't? But it isn't administered in a way that's fair, and it's not administered in a way that's going to be available, I think, to most everyday Nebraskans. It's really reserved for mainly the wealthy. And in fact, those first 25 million, I think that the estates and trusts, which were allowed larger maximums, will probably take advantage of it to the point where it'll be difficult for a lot of Nebraskans to try to even see those tax credits. And then when you start talking about the scholarships to the students, unfortunately, there's a lot of private schools that just really decline students with certain disabilities. And obviously, we know that there's many out there that discriminate based on LGBTQ status. So it's just really not good policy. I think that the legislature should have rolled up their sleeves and worked better on education policy, especially for our public schools. We want to support our private schools as well, but this was not the way to get it done. I know that the Support Our Schools Nebraska group has received approval on the wording for the measure from the Secretary of State. And I believe that those petition pages are being printed this weekend. So, probably starting on Monday, Nebraskans will be able to find a petition and sign. And it's important to do it early and quickly. There's a deadline with this process, and I believe it needs to be completed by the end of summer. So if you go to Support Our Schools Nebraska and find they've got a calendar with locations where you can go and find a petition drive so that you can sign, take your spouse, get whoever else, registered voters, make sure that we get this completed and certified so that we can all just move on to other things. And it'll be on the ballot then next year.
Awesome. And I will definitely put that link for that website so you can keep your eyes on that. And like you said, check out the calendar of events where petition drives will be. I'm sure they'll be out at many events this summer.
And across the state. In fact, I'm in Grand Island at a baseball tournament this weekend. And I was just talking with someone here to watch their grandson play baseball, and they're from the North Platte area. The rural school districts are really the ones that are also not liking this legislation. And I think that it's really good if we can get some of these counties that are out in other parts of the state, if we get them qualified right away. There's just really a lot of Nebraskans who are surprised that the senators move forward with this. It's extreme, and most Nebraskans just don't want it.
Absolutely. We'll keep our eyes and ears peeled on that. I know when we talked offline that you had some ideas for some homework during this, I want to call it active rest summer. Even though the session is over, there will no longer be any debates on live stream. At this time, senators are on break, but that doesn't mean that we take a complete rest. We can rest and reset. That's important, but we can still be actively engaging in many different things. We had already mentioned the checking your registration, things that you can do to support our schools. But Cindy, you had some other ideas. Can you share that with the audience?
Sure. And just to remind everybody that Nebraska's legislature is on a 2-year biennium schedule. And so this was the first year of the biennium, 90 days. And then the second year of the biennium starts in January and it's for 60 days. And just like with this year, there will be a bill introduction in in the beginning of January. There will be committee hearings and then floor debate and work that the legislature completes on the floor of the unicameral. But a lot of things happen in the interim. And one of the things that I think is so important is that everybody keep in touch with your senator. Make sure that you're in touch with your legislator. Let them know your priorities, your concerns for your family, for your business, for your community. Do you have ideas for legislation? Asking them to introduce and sponsor it. Or if your legislator is not interested, I'm sure that we could help you try to find others that might be available as far as to introduce legislation that you think would be benefit to our state. What the senators do in the interim, many of them work, right, with their just like regular employment, but There's interim studies taking place. There will be committee hearings at various times. I know that a lot of them are doing their own research. There may be visiting and touring key locations, talking with stakeholders, and they should also be talking with everyday Nebraskans. And that is the thing that I'm really wanting to make sure that you're proactive about. And then Speaker Arch actually has an interim study about participation with the legislature. I'm super excited about that. And we'll make sure and put out information as we learn how people give feedback to the senators about how we can participate better as the second house. It's our responsibility, it's our privilege, but it is our responsibility. This nonpartisan legislature is designed that the senators rely on us so that we can help them make the best laws for our state. I did want to say that some homework that over your summer while you're resting is to think about running for office. If you have any thought that you would be a good elected official, now is the time to look into it and consider it. If it's not for you, please do support progressive candidates that are up for election in your district. I know that the elections aren't coming until 2024. So we're talking a year and a half basically from now, but it is important to start early and strong in reaching voters in your area and community, talking about keeping informed, finding candidates to support. If your candidate isn't up for election this session, if you're in an even number district, go find a candidate in an odd number district and support them because it is going to be really important that we try to protect some of the seats in the legislature and then hopefully get better representatives and maybe flip a few. That is something that's going to require all of us coming together to support these candidates when we can donate, when we can help candidates get in touch with other people who can support them with monetary contributions, people who can help with scheduling events or hosting neighborhood meet and greets or writing postcards, helping with technology or phone calls, door to door, going and talking and canvassing with your favorite candidate. Those types of things are really important to do on an ongoing basis and not just right before the election. I wanted to put a plug in for that because I know that I am going to find a few candidates that I really am confident in as far as where they're at for their priorities that I feel will really commit to protecting Nebraskans' rights and also stand up to make some improvements so that we can really grow our state and thrive. And I'm going to be out there canvassing and trying to help them. So hopefully
And
you'll join me.
yeah. And what would you say is the best way for people to find out if their state rep is up for reelection and ways that they can get involved? I would say your website is a good avenue.
Yes. And even just to make sure and put in the show notes about how to find your senator, there is a link on the Nebraska legislature website where you can put in your address and it will search to verify who your senator is because actually redistricting affected people that might not realize still that their boundary lines have changed. So it's a good idea to do that. And on that page, when it comes up and shows your senator and you click on it, it will show their election history. And if they are in their second term, then they're term limited. It's basically an open primary. It's a nonpartisan primary in Nebraska. And as many people can run for legislature of any party. And then the top two candidates, the top two vote getters out of the primary go head to head in the general. So one of the neat things about our Nebraska legislature is that it is nonpartisan. So you might be in a district that would have two Republicans running against each other in the general, or two Democrats, or like in my district last time, it was a Republican and me. I'm a nonpartisan. It's really good to make sure and verify which district you're in. And then if you belong to a certain party, get in touch with your party leaders and ask them how you can help. If you know a candidate directly, make sure and introduce them to everybody. That's just part of the process, helping them get to know people in their district. And that way they can tell their neighbors.
Be sure to stay tuned to the Swing Left Nebraska podcast because we will definitely be inviting candidates on again, like we did at the last election. So you have a good opportunity to hear from the candidates and hear what their platform is and what they are doing and what they plan to do.
Yes, and I just learned how on my I'm sorry, I'm not super techie as far as my podcast. I've learned how to get push notifications when there's a new one. So hopefully people will make sure and subscribe to your podcast because they're so good. And then that way they'll be notified when you have interviews that you're doing with people.
Yes, that is a good plug right there. Make sure you subscribe because it does give you the opportunity to stay aware when we have new podcasts because we may be taking some break over the summer, actively resting. So there may be some weekends that there won't be any podcasts, but if you are subscribed, you will get that notification that a new episode has dropped. So as we wrap this up, this very bittersweet episode today, coming to an end, is there any final words that you have for our incredible, amazing, loyal listeners?
Don't give up hope. I just think it's so important that we recognize in Nebraska, we were able to stop really more bad legislation than some of us thought. And I am disappointed and sad. I know a lot of us are very worried about the bill that's now in the courts with LB 574 and with the gun legislation and things regarding school funding and any number of issues facing our state. It is important that we remember that together we really can make a difference. And I think that the senators will hopefully go home, talk with their constituents, and learn that not everybody is wanting all of this extreme legislation. And I'm really optimistic that we can hopefully get things turned around in our state.
I love your optimism. It is contagious. So thank you. Those are some great final words. So with that, I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you, Sydney. This has been incredible getting to know you personally, off the record and on the record, and just cannot thank you enough for all that you do, especially going down to the Capitol to show your face, to make your voice heard, and then to take in all that information and bring it back so that you can share it with the ears of our listeners here in Nebraska. So thank you so much, Sydney.
Thank you.
As we come to the end of this season of the Swing Left Nebraska podcast, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in and joining us on this journey. We hope that through our conversations and interviews, we've been able to provide you with a deeper understanding of the political landscape in Nebraska and the importance of getting involved and using your voice. But our work is far from over. The fight for a more just and equitable society continues, and we must remain vigilant and engaged. We encourage you to get involved in your local community, whether it's through volunteering for a political campaign, supporting a local organization, or simply having conversations with your friends and family about the issues that matter most to you. We also want to remind you that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, dedication, and hard work. But if we all do our part, we can create a better future for ourselves and for generations to come. Thank you for listening to the Swing Left Nebraska podcast. We'll be back soon with more conversations and insights into the world of politics and grassroots organizing. Until then, keep fighting the good fight. Let's mobilize, let's take action, let's go.
Ready, set, go. Get ready to go.